It has been a remarkable 7 days for Canada on the world stage. Last Friday, Chrystia Freeland tweeted that Canada was alarmed about the imprisonment of 2 activists in Saudi Arabia and called for their release. That tweet sparked an unexpected response from Saudi Arabia. Among other measures, the country has frozen all new trade and investment with Canada and kicked out our ambassador. The Prime Minister responded Wednesday by saying that the world expects this kind of leadership from Canada. But if that's true, some of Canada's closest allies have a strange way of showing it. The message this week from the U.S. and the U.K.? You're on your own on this one. So where does that leave Canada? Bruen is the president of the Global Situation Room and former director of global engagement at the White House under President Obama. He joins us now from Washington. Hi, Mr. Bruen. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Good to join you.
So why do you think that our allies, notably, as we mentioned, the U.S. and the U.K., haven't had Canada's back, really, in standing up for human rights in this specific case?
Well, first and foremost, I think we have seen America's withdraw from the world stage, from leadership on issues such as human rights. And unfortunately, that is having consequences for other countries and allies, such as the European Union, that don't feel like they have the cover to take steps that would have in the past been logical ones to stand beside a country that was standing up for human rights.
What do you mean by they don't feel like they have the cover? I mean, the UK isn't, has operated on its own in the past. Why does it need the US's cover in order to just say, hey, Canada's right in this one?
Because the world has long depended on the U.S. to take the first step. And I think a lot of these countries are not used to having to speak up on their own. And they would have expected in the past that the first word would have come from Washington and they would follow suit.
In this case, do you think that's always fair, though? I mean, Mr. Badawi, the political blogger who this kind of spurred all of this, has been in jail for a number of years there. What spurred this specific tweet was his sister's arrest, a women's rights advocate. I was reading an op-ed in the Washington Post today about President Obama's comments on Mr. Badawi, and he briefly called to cancel the flogging, his first flogging, but the kingdom there, Saudi Arabia, ignored that plea. And the editorial said so much for strong language from the State Department. It had no impact because it came with no consequences. Is there really such a difference now versus then?
Well, I think at least in the past we were speaking up, and we certainly would have, in this case, spoken out against what were disproportionate actions taken by the Saudis. It's one thing for the Saudis to bristle at some of these critiques. It's an entirely different one for them to take the kinds of steps such as cutting off trade and even calling for Saudis in Canada to leave the country. Those are pretty radical measures that I think the U.S. In the past would have calmed before they got out of control.
Do you think the Saudis are trying to make a bigger point here?
I think the Saudis are trying to put a stake in the ground and say external expectations no longer apply to us. Since the U.S. is not dictating some of these terms, we are going to take advantage of that. We are going to set our own terms for relations with the world.
You also wrote in an opinion piece that Canada is likely to lose this fight. Why do you say that, and what does losing it look like?
Well, I think Canada, unfortunately, is at a disadvantage. They don't have the support of other allies on this issue. And without that, it's hard to see how they will be able to return this situation to one that's favorable to the outcome that Canada seeks. So I think, unfortunately, Canada is going to come out on the losing end of this. They will have to back down. That being said, let me just take a moment to discuss what success would look like. It's a non-traditional approach. Canada would need to go not to the sources of power, the government, but to the people in countries like the U.S. and Europe and say, this is the value that we are standing up for, and we want you to stand with us.
Do you think that there is the possibility that could happen? Is civil society, for example, listening? Is this, what has the impact of this been? Are people paying attention, I guess, in the United States?
Well, they aren't yet, and I think it would require from Ottawa a strategy, new structures to be put in place to engage people, civil society groups, even companies around these issues. We've seen in the past when those elements are engaged, not only on issues like workplace harassment or, in the case of the United States, gun violence, the equation, the calculus can be changed, and I think in the case of Saudi Arabia, that's what it would take for Riyadh to change its posture.
Given the current calculus and what you've talked about and the idea that there was really no way that those allies would have our back in this one, do you think it was a mistake for Canada to send out that tweet?
Not at all. I think it's important that Canada continue to speak up on these issues. They just need, going forward, to have a better strategy in place to understand that the support that they once could have enjoyed from the U.S. is no longer going to be there.
President Trump hasn't been immune from some criticism on both the left and the right for not coming to Canada, for the kind of statement that came out from the United States, which was essentially, you guys have to work it out. Do you think there's any chance he will eventually kind of come out in support of these actions, or no way?
I think it's unlikely that he will give a full-throated argument in favor of Canada. And in all likelihood, what we're going to see is that the U.S. is going to sit on the sidelines and expect that the Saudis and the Canadians will resolve this one amongst themselves. And that, unfortunately, I think means that the Saudis are going to continue to keep the pressure up until Ottawa backs down, or at least gives them a pass on this one, and they can move forward.
Is there a wider consequence for countries who do want to defend human rights or talk about human rights in the world of the United States backing away in the way you've described?
I think so. I think we are likely to see in the coming months and years that it becomes more challenging for countries to speak out against human rights abuses. What we are likely to have is a situation in which countries that have a certain degree of power, as Saudi Arabia does, they are going to try to use that power to exert their influence so that they no longer have to abide by the same rules that the U.S. used to enforce.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, Mr. Bruen. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.